All right, we are a little after 8 o'clock. Had to take some time to mix up a drink, but we are ready to get started. So, settle in, get comfortable, grab a seat, pull up a chair, mix your own drink if you haven't yet, and let's see what the night has in store for us. Welcome back. This is our 12th session reading Cervantes' Don Quixote. We seem to have found the precise center of the universe with this one. This very specific inn that all of our characters seem to find themselves in is certainly what all known creation revolves around, and everyone seems to pass through this very inn on this very night. It's a mystery. It's one for the ages. Shenanigans and terrible people, yes, indeed. Equal parts? Maybe. At least they're usually terrible to each other. Although all the lookers-on who are fully aware of how round the bend both Don Quixote and Sancho are, and really aren't doing anything about it, are probably kind of terrible in and of their own right. They may mean well, but they're really just kind of enabling things, aren't they? Well, let's go ahead and see what we shall see. Yes, elder abuse is a very good way to put it. Although, I'm not sure how to take that, because I think Don Quixote is only around 50 in this. It's certainly south of 60. He's old and elder by the times, but through a modern lens, that kind of stings. Don't you start. Don't you start, because that, you know what that is? That's elder abuse. Yeah, as we've established, you're a little bit older than I am, so be careful throwing boomerangs. Alright, let's go ahead and get back to where we left off last time. Let's shift back to our little reading nook and get back into our misadventure. It's old, I'm old, you're old, we're all old. It's all a matter of perspective, really, right? Alright, we are resuming tonight from chapter 45. Actually, I do know that there are multiple parts to Don Quixote, as M brought up last time that we visited him. Now I'm actually curious where part 1 ends and part 2 begins, because we're nearly halfway through the book. So if we're going to take a break for Don Quixote, at the break would be, or at the end of part 1 would be a fantastic place to do so. Hang on. Now curiosity has its grip on me. Oh, okay. It looks like chapter 52 is the end of the first part. So we've got a couple days, actually. We're not terribly far from that. So usually we get about well, depending on the length of the chapters, we can get sometimes 5, 6 chapters in on these Don Quixote nights. So, I guess I have to have a decision to make on whether or not we want to continue with Don Quixote through the first part, or through the second part, or if we take a little bit of a break for it, because we're already 12 sections in. We'll see. We'll see. I'll have to think about that tonight. We'll see how far we are. Alright, anyway, that's enough stating of curiosity for the night. Let's go ahead and actually get back into our reading. We have now chapter 45, in which the doubtful question of Mambrino's helmet and the pack saddle is finally settled, with other adventures that occurred in truth and earnest. Remember, we're having a bit of a chaotic reunion here, as the barber that Don Quixote and Sancho waylaid and stole his basin and the saddles of his horse, or of his mule, has found himself back at the inn with everyone else in Spain. "What do you think now, gentlemen," said the barber, "of what these gentles say, when they want to make out that this is a helmet? And whoever says to the contrary," said Don Quixote, "I will let him know he lies if he is a knight, and if he is a squire, that he lies again 1,000 times." Our own barber, who was present at all this, and understood Don Quixote's humor so thoroughly, took it into his head to back up his delusion and carry on the joke for the general amusement. Here we go with elder abuse again. So, addressing the other barber, he said, "Signor Barber, whatever you are, you must know that I belong to your profession too, and have had a license to practice for more than 20 years, and I know the implements of the barber craft, every one of them, perfectly well, and I was likewise a soldier for some time in the days of my youth, and I know also what a helmet is, and a morion, and a headpiece with a visor, and other things pertaining to soldiering. I meant to say to soldiers' arms. And I say, saving better opinions, and always with submission to sounder judgments, that this piece we have now before us, which this worthy gentleman has in his hands, not only is no barber's basin, but is as far from being one as white is from black, and truth from falsehood. I say, moreover, that this, although it is a helmet, is not a complete helmet." "Certainly not," said Don Quixote, "for half of it is wanting, that is to say, the beaver." "It is quite true," said the curate, who saw the object of his friend, the barber. And Cardenio, Don Fernando, and his companions agreed with him, and even the judge, if his thoughts had not been so full of Don Luis's affair, would have helped to carry on the joke. But he was so taken up with the serious matters he had on his mind that he paid little or no attention to these facetious proceedings. A reminder for the peanut gallery that a barber is, at the time, most closely related to basically a physician, a doctor. Kind of a hedge doctor of sorts. "God bless me!" exclaimed the barber at this. "Is it possible that such an honourable company can say that this is not a basin but a helmet? Why, this is a thing that would astonish a whole university. However wise it might be, that will do. If this basin is a helmet, why then the pack saddle must be a horse's caparison, as this gentleman has said." "To me it looks like a pack saddle," said Don Quixote, "but I have already said that with that question I do not concern myself." "As to whether it be a pack saddle or a caparison," said the curate, "it is only for Signor Don Quixote to say, for in these matters of chivalry all these gentlemen and I bow to his authority." "By God, gentlemen," said Don Quixote, "so many strange things have happened to me in this castle on the 2 occasions on which I have sojourned in it, that I will not venture to assert anything positively in reply to any question touching anything it contains. For it is my belief that everything that goes on within it goes by enchantment. The first time an enchanted Moor that there is in it gave me sore trouble, nor did Sancho fare well among certain followers of his. And last night, get back here. Last night, I was kept hanging by this arm for nearly 2 hours, without knowing how or why I came by such a mishap. So that now, for me to come forward to give an opinion in such a puzzling matter, would be to risk a rash decision. As regards the assertion that this is a basin and not a helmet, I have already given an answer. But as to the question whether this is a pack saddle or a caparison, I will not venture to give a positive opinion, but will leave it to your worship's better judgment. Perhaps, as you are not dubbed knights like myself, the enchantments of this place have nothing to do with you, and your faculties are unfettered. And as you can see things in this castle as they really and truly are, and not as they appear to me. There can be no question, said Don Fernando on this, but that Signor Don Quixote has spoken very wisely, and that with us rests the decision on this matter. And that we may have surer ground to go on, I will take the votes of the gentlemen in secret, and declare the result clearly and fully. And here we have the advent of democracy to Spain. To those who were in on the secret of Don Quixote's humor, all this afforded great amusement. To those who knew nothing about it, it seemed the greatest nonsense in the world. In particular, to the 4 servants of Don Luis, who, as well as to Don Luis himself, and to the 3 other travelers who had by chance come to the inn and had the appearance of officers of the Holy Brotherhood, as indeed they were. But the one who above all was at his wit's end was the barber, whose basin, there before his very eyes, had been turned into Mambrino's helmet, and whose pack saddle, he had no doubt whatever, was about to become a rich caparison for a horse. All laughed to see Don Fernando going from one to another collecting the votes, and whispering to them to give him their private opinion, whether the treasure over which there had been so much fighting was a pack saddle or a caparison. But after he had taken the votes of those who knew Don Quixote, he said aloud, "The fact is, my good fellow, that I am tired collecting such a number of opinions, for I find that there is not one of whom I ask that I desire to know, who does not tell me that it is absurd to say that this is the pack saddle of an ass, and not the caparison of a horse, nay, of a thoroughbred horse. So you must submit, for in spite of you and your ass, this is a caparison, and no pack saddle, and you have stated and proved your case very badly." "May I never share heaven," said the poor barber, "if your worships are not all mistaken, and may my soul appear before God as that appears to me a pack saddle, and not a caparison, but laws go. I say no more, and indeed I am not drunk, for I am fasting, except it be from sin." The simple talk of the barber did not afford less amusement than the absurdities of Don Quixote, who now observed, "There is no more to be done now than for each to take what belongs to him, and to whom God has given it, may Saint Peter add his blessing." "But," said one of the 4 servants, "unless, indeed, this is a deliberate joke, I cannot bring myself to believe that men so intelligent as those present are, or seem to be, can venture to declare and assert that this is not a basin, and that not a pack saddle. But as I perceive that they do assert and declare it, I can only come to the conclusion that there is some mystery in this persistence, in what it was so opposed to the evidence of experience and truth itself. For I swear by," and here he rapped out a round oath, all the people in the world will not make me believe that this is not a barber's basin, and that a jackass's pack-saddle. It might easily be a she-ass's, observed the curate. Very smooth, very smooth. It is all the same, said the servant. That is not the point. But whether it is or is not a pack-saddle, as your worship say. On hearing this, one of the newly arrived officers of the Brotherhood, who had been listening to the dispute and controversy, unable to restrain his anger and impatience, exclaimed, "It is a pack-saddle, as sure as my father is my father, and whoever has said or will say anything else must be drunk." "You lie like a rascally clown," returned Don Quixote, and lifting his pike, which he had never let out of his hand, he delivered such a blow at his head that, had not the officer dodged it, it would have stretched him at full length. The pike was shivered in pieces against the ground, and the rest of the officers, seeing their comrade assaulted, raised a shout, calling for help for the Holy Brotherhood. The landlord, who was of the fraternity, ran at once to fetch his staff of office and his sword, and ranged himself on the side of his comrades. The servants of Don Luis clustered around him, lest he should escape from them in the confusion. The barber, seeing the house turned upside down once more, laid hold of his pack-saddle, and Sancho did the same. Don Quixote drew his sword and charged the officers. Don Luis cried out to his servants to leave him alone and go and help Don Quixote, and Cardenio and Don Fernando, who were supporting him. The curate was shouting at the top of his voice, the landlady was screaming, her daughter was wailing, Maritornes was weeping, Dorothea was aghast, Lucinda terror-stricken, and Dona Clara in a faint. The barber cudgeled Sancho, and Sancho pummeled the barber. Don Luis gave one of his servants, who ventured to catch him by the arm to keep him from escaping, a cuff that bathed his teeth in blood. The judge took his part. Don Fernando had got one of the officers down and was belaboring him heartily. The landlord raised his voice again, calling for help for the Holy Brotherhood, so that the whole inn was nothing but cries, shouts, shrieks, confusion, terror, dismay, mishaps, sword cuts, fisticuffs, cudgellings, kicks, and bloodshed. And in the midst of all this chaos, complication, and general entanglement, Don Quixote took it into his head that he had been plunged into the thick of the discord of Agramont's camp. And, in a voice that shook the inn like thunder, he cried out, "Hold all! Let all sheathe their swords! Let all be calm and attend to me, as they value their lives!" I have to make a quick comment. That last paragraph was some of the finest bit of chaos put to pen that I've ever seen. It just, you can only imagine all of the absolute insanity going on in the common room of that inn. All paused at his mighty voice, and he went on to say, "Did I not tell you, sirs, that this castle was enchanted, and that a legion or so of devils dwelt in it? In proof whereof I call upon you to behold, with your own eyes, how the discord of Agramont's camp has come hither, and been transferred into the midst of us. See how they fight, there for the sword, here for the horse, on that side for the eagle, on this for the helmet. We are all fighting, and all at cross purposes. Come then, you, Signor Judge, and you, Signor Curate, let the one represent King Agramont, and the other King Sobrino, and make peace among us. For by God Almighty, it is a sorry business that so many persons of quality as we are should slay one another for such a trifling cause." The officers, who did not understand Don Quixote's mode of speaking, and found themselves roughly handled by Don Fernando, Cardenio, and their companions, were not to be appeased. The barber was, however, for both his beard and his pack-saddle were the worse for the struggle. Sancho, like a good servant, obeyed the slightest word of his master, while the 4 servants of Don Luis kept quiet when they saw how little they gained by not doing so. The landlord alone insisted upon it that they must punish the insolence of this madman, who at every turn raised a disturbance in the inn. But at length, the uproar was stilled for the present. The pack saddle remained a caparison till the day of judgment, and the basin a helmet, and the inn a castle in Don Quixote's imagination. All having been now pacified and made friends by the persuasion of the judge and the curate, the servants of Don Luis began again to urge him to return them with them at once, and while he was discussing the matter with them, the judge took counsel with Don Fernando, Cardenio, and the curate as to what he ought to do in the case, telling them how it stood and what Don Luis had said to him. It was agreed at length that Don Fernando should tell the servants of Don Luis who he was, and that it was his desire that Don Luis should accompany him to Andalusia, where he would receive from the Marquis his brother the welcome his quality entitled him to. For otherwise, it was easy to see from the determination of Don Luis that he would not return to his father at present. One moment. It is our nightly band time. Thank you. Bonk there. Though they tore him to pieces. On learning the rank of Don Fernando and the resolution of Don Luis, the 4 then settled it between themselves that the 3 of them should return to tell his father how matters stood, and that the other should remain to wait upon Don Luis and not leave him until they came back for him, or his father's orders were known. Thus, by the authority of Agramont and the wisdom of King Sobrino, all this complication of disputes was arranged. But the enemy of concord and hater of peace, feeling himself slighted and made a fool of, and seeing how little he had gained after having involved them all in such an elaborate entanglement, resolved to try his hand once more by stirring up fresh quarrels and disturbances. It came about in this wise. The officers were pacified on learning the rank of those with whom they had been engaged, and withdrew from the contest, considering that, whatever the result might be, they were likely to get the worst of the battle. But one of them, the one who had been thrashed and kicked by Don Fernando, recollected that among some warrants he carried for the arrest of certain delinquents, he had one against Don Quixote, whom the Holy Brotherhood had ordered to be arrested for setting the galley slaves free, as Sancho had, with very good reason, apprehended. Suspecting how it was, then, he wished to satisfy himself as to whether Don Quixote's features correspond, and, taking a parchment out of his bosom, he lit upon what he was in search of, and setting himself to read it deliberately, for he was not a quick reader. As he made out each word, he fixed his eyes on Don Quixote, and went on comparing the description in the warrant with his face, and discovered that beyond all doubt he was the person described in it. As soon as he had satisfied himself, folding up the parchment, he took the warrant in his left hand, and with his right seized Don Quixote by the collar so tightly that he did not allow him to breathe, and shouted aloud, "Help for the Holy Brotherhood! And that you may see, I demand it in earnest. Read this warrant, which says this highwayman is to be arrested." The curate took the warrant, and saw that what the officer said was true, and that it agreed with Don Quixote's appearance, who, on his part, when he found himself roughly handled by this rascally clown, worked up to the highest pitch of wrath, and all his joints cracking with rage, with both hands seized the officer by the throat with all his might, so that, had he not been helped by his comrades, he would have yielded up his life ere Don Quixote released his hold. The landlord, who had perforce to support his brother officers, ran at once to aid them, The landlady, when she saw her husband engaged in a fresh quarrel, lifted up her voice afresh, and its note was immediately caught up by Maritornes and her daughter, calling upon heaven and all present for help, and Sancho, seeing what was going on, exclaimed, "By the Lord, it is quite true quite true what my master says about the enchantments of this castle, for it is impossible to live an hour in peace in it." Don Fernando parted the officer and Don Quixote, and to their mutual contentment made them relax the grip by which they held, the one the coat collar, the other the throat of his adversary. For all this, however, the officers did not cease to demand their prisoner, and call on them to help, and deliver him over, bound into their power, as was required for the service of the king, and of the Holy Brotherhood, on whose behalf they again demanded aid and assistance, to effect the capture of this robber and footpad of the highways. Don Quixote smiled when he heard these words, and said very calmly, "Come now, base, ill-born brood, call ye it highway robbery to give freedom to those in bondage, to release the captives, to succor the miserable, to raise up the fallen, to relieve the needy? Infamous beings, who by your vile, groveling intellects deserve that heaven should not make known to you the virtue that lies in knight-errantry, or show you the sin and ignorance in which ye lie when ye refuse to respect the shadow, not to say the presence, of any knight-errant. Come now, band, not of officers, but of thieves, footpads with the license of the Holy Brotherhood, tell me, who was the ignoramus who signed a warrant of arrest against such a knight as I am? Who was he that did not know that knights-errant are independent of all jurisdictions, that their law is their sword, their charter their prowess, and their edicts their will? Who, I say again, was the fool that knows not that there are no letters patent of nobility that confer such privileges or exemptions as a knight-errant acquires the day he is dubbed a knight, and devotes himself to the arduous calling of chivalry? What knight-errant ever paid poll tax, duty, queen's pin money, king's dues, toll, or ferry? What tailor ever took payment of him for making his clothes? What castellan that received him in his castle ever made him pay his shot? What king did not seat him at his table? What damsel was not enamored of him and did not yield herself up wholly to his will and pleasure? And lastly, what knight-errant has there been, is there, or will there ever be in the world, not bold enough to give single-handed 400 cudgelings to 400 officers of the Holy Brotherhood if they come in his way?" Oh my. Well, say what you will about Don Quixote, he is certainly fiery, and apparently quite a bit stronger than is let on, given his wiry frame. But he is well and goodly in the wrong here. We'll see whether all of his conspirators, lookers-on, his own peanut gallery, are going to back him in this, or if he's going to weasel his own way out. The authorities are certainly after him, though, at this point. Alright, let's continue now with Chapter 46 of the end of the notable adventure of the officers of the Holy Brotherhood, and of the great ferocity of our worthy knight, Don Quixote. While Don Quixote was talking in this strain, the curate was endeavoring to persuade the officers that he was out of his senses, as they might perceive by his deeds and his words, and that they need not press the matter any further, for even if they arrested him and carried him off, they would have to release him by and by as a madman, to which the holder of the warrant replied that he had nothing to do with inquiring into Don Quixote's madness, only to execute his superior's orders, and that once taken, they might let him go 300 times if they liked. "For all that," said the curate, "you must not take him away this time, nor will he, it is my opinion, let himself be taken away." In short, the curate used such arguments, and Don Quixote did such mad things, that the officers would have been more mad than he was if they had not perceived his want of wits. And so, they thought it best to allow themselves to be pacified, and even to act as peacemakers between the barber and Sancho Panza, who still continued their altercation with much bitterness. I'm just imagining all through this, Don Quixote giving his speech, the curate whispering in the ear of the officers of the peace, and Sancho and the barber are just beating each other senseless, pulling on each other's beards, tearing clothes and everything. Just completely ignored by everyone else as they're just beating the snot out of each other. In the end, they, as officers of justice, settled the question by arbitration in such a manner that both sides were, if not perfectly contented, at least to some extent satisfied. For they changed the pack saddles, but not the girths or headstalls, and as to Mambrino's helmet, the curate, under the rose and without Don Quixote's knowing it, paid 8 reals for the basin. And the barber executed a full receipt and engagement to make no further demand then or thenceforth for evermore. Amen. These two disputes, which were the most important and gravest, being settled, it only remained for the servants of Don Luis to consent that 3 of them should return, while one was left to accompany him whither Don Fernando desired to take him. And good luck and better fortune, having already begun to solve difficulties and remove obstructions in favor of the lovers and warriors of the inn, were pleased to persevere and bring everything to a happy issue. For the servants agreed to do as Don Luis wished, which gave Doña Clara such happiness that no one could have looked into her face just then without seeing the joy of her heart. Zoraida, though she did not fully comprehend all she saw, remember she doesn't speak Spanish, was grave, or gay without knowing why, as she watched and studied the various countenances, but particularly her Spaniards, whom she followed with her eyes and clung to with her soul. The gift and compensation which the curate gave the barber had not escaped the landlord's notice, and he demanded Don Quixote's reckoning, together with the amount of the damage to his wineskins, and the loss of his wine, swearing that neither Rocinante nor Sancho's ass should leave the inn until he had been paid to the very last farthing. The curate settled all amicably, and Don Fernando paid, though the judge had also very readily offered to pay the score, and all became so peaceful and quiet that the inn no longer reminded one of the discord of Agramont's camp, as Don Quixote said, but of the peace and tranquillity of the days of Octavianus, for all which it was the universal opinion that their thanks were due to the great zeal and eloquence of the curate, and to the unexampled generosity of Don Fernando. Finding himself now clear and quit of all quarrels, his squires as well as his own, Don Quixote considered that it would be advisable to continue the journey as he had begun, and bring to a close that great adventure for which he had been called and chosen. And with this high resolve, he went and knelt before Dorothea, who, however, would not allow him to utter a word until he had risen. So, to obey her, he rose, and said, "It is a common proverb, fair lady, that diligence is the mother of good fortune. And experience has often shown in important affairs that the earnestness of the negotiator brings the doubtful case to a successful termination. But In nothing does this truth show itself more plainly than in war, where quickness and activity forestall the devices of the enemy, and win the victory before the foe has time to defend himself. All this I say, exalted and esteemed lady, because it seems to me that for us to remain any longer in this castle now is useless, and may be injurious to us in a way that we shall find out some day. For who knows but that your enemy, the giant, may have learned by means of secret and diligent spies that I am going to destroy him. And if the opportunity be given him, he may seize it to fortify himself in some impregnable castle or stronghold, against which all my efforts and the might of my indefatigable arm may avail but little. Therefore, lady, let us, as I say, forestall his schemes by our activity, and let us depart at once in quest of fair fortune. For your highness is only kept from enjoying it as fully as you could desire by my delay in encountering your adversary.
Don Quixote held his peace, and said no more, calmly awaiting the reply of the beauteous princess, who, with commanding dignity and in a style adapted to Don Quixote's own, replied to him in these words: "I give you thanks, Sir Knight, for the eagerness you, like a good knight to whom it is a natural obligation to succor the orphan and the needy, display to afford me aid in my sore trouble, and heaven grant that your wishes and mine may be realized, so that you may see that there are women in this world capable of gratitude. As to my departure, let it be forthwith, for I have no will but yours. Dispose of me entirely in accordance with your good pleasure, for she who has once entrusted to you the defence of her person, and placed in your hands the recovery of her dominions, must not think of offering opposition to that which your wisdom may ordain."
"On then, in God's name," said Don Quixote, "for when a lady humbles herself to me, I will not lose the opportunity of raising her up and placing her on the throne of her ancestors. Let us depart at once, for the common saying that in delay there is danger lends spurs to my eagerness to take the road. And as neither heaven has created nor hell seen any that can daunt or intimidate me, saddle Rocinante, Sancho, and get ready thy ass and the queen's palfrey, and let us take leave of the castellan and these gentlemen, and go hence this very instant."
I know it's juvenile, but every time they have to know. The translator had to have known that ass was gonna get a giggle every time. It doesn't matter what era you're from. Sancho, who was standing by all the time, said, shaking his head, "Oh, master, there is more mischief in the village than one hears of, begging all good bodies' pardon."
"What mischief can there be in any village, or in all the cities of the world, you booby, that can hurt my reputation?" said Don Quixote.
"If your worship is angry," replied Sancho, "I will hold my tongue and leave unsaid what as a good squire I am bound to say, and what a good servant should tell his master."
"Say what thou wilt," returned Don Quixote, "provided thy words be not meant to work upon my fears. For thou, if thou fearest, art behaving like thyself, but I, like myself, in not fearing."
It is nothing of the sort, as I am a sinner before God," said Sancho, "but that I take it to be sure and certain that this lady who calls herself queen of the great kingdom of Micomicon is no more so than my mother. For if she was what she says, she would not go rubbing noses with one that is here every instant and behind every door."
Dorothea turned red at Sancho's words, for the truth was that her husband, Don Fernando, had now and then, when the others were not looking, gathered from her lips some of the reward his love had earned. And Sancho, seeing this, had considered that such freedom was more like a courtesan than a queen of a great kingdom. She, however, being unable or not caring to answer him, allowed him to proceed, and he continued.
This I say, Signor, because if, after we have travelled roads and highways and passed bad nights and worse days, one who is now enjoying himself in this inn is to reap the fruits of our labours, there is no need for me to be in a hurry to saddle Rocinante, but put the pad on the ass or get ready the palfrey, for it will be better for us to stay quiet, and let every jade mind her spinning, and let us go to dinner.
Good God! What was the indignation of Don Quixote when he heard the audacious words of his squire? So great was it, that in a voice inarticulate with rage, with a stammering tongue, and eyes that flashed living fire, he exclaimed, "Rascally clown, boorish, insolent, and ignorant, ill-spoken, foul-mouthed, impudent backbiter and slanderer! Hast thou dared to utter such words in my presence and in that of these illustrious ladies? Hast thou dared to harbour such gross and shameless thoughts in thy muddled imagination? Begone from my presence, thou born monster, storehouse of lies, hoard of untruths, garner of knaveries, inventor of scandals, publisher of absurdities, enemy of the respect due to royal personages. Begone! Show thyself no more before me under pain of my wrath." Ooh. I'm glad my voice was back for that, because that was a fun passage, and I would not have enjoyed that with failing pipes. And so saying, he knitted his brows, puffed out his cheeks, gazed around him, and stamped on the ground violently with his right foot, showing in every way the rage that was pent up in his heart. And at his words and furious gestures, Sancho was so scared and terrified that he would have been glad if the earth had opened up that instant and swallowed him, and his only thought was to turn round and make his escape from the angry presence of his master. But the ready-witted Dorothea, who by this time was so well understood Don Quixote's humour, said, to mollify his wrath, "Be not irritated at the absurdities your good squire has uttered, Sir Knight of the Rueful Countenance, for perhaps he did not utter them without cause, and from his good sense and Christian conscience, it is not likely that he would bear false witness against anyone. We may therefore believe, without any hesitation, that since, as you say, Sir Knight, everything in this castle goes and is brought about by means of enchantment, Sancho, I say, may possibly have seen, through this diabolical medium, what he says he saw so much to the detriment of my modesty." "I swear, by God omnipotent," exclaimed Don Quixote at this, "your highness has hit the point, and that some vile illusion must have come before this sinner of a Sancho, that made him see what it would have been impossible to see by any other means than enchantments. For I know well enough, from the poor fellow's goodness and harmlessness, that he is incapable of bearing false witness against anybody." "True, no doubt," said Don Fernando, "for which reason, Signor Don Quixote, you ought to forgive him, and restore him to the bosom of your favour. Sicut erat in principio, before illusions of this sort had taken away his senses." Don Quixote said he was ready to pardon him, and the curate went for Sancho, who came in very humbly, and falling on his knees, begged for the hand of his master, who, having presented it to him and allowed him to kiss it, gave him his blessing, and said, "Now, Sancho, my son, thou wilt be convinced of the truth of what I have many a time told thee, that everything in this castle is done by means of enchantment."
"So it is, I believe," said Sancho, "except the affair of the blanket, which came to pass in reality by ordinary means."
"Believe it or not," said Don Quixote, "for had it been so, I would have avenged thee that instant, or even now. But neither then nor now could I, nor have I seen anyone upon whom to avenge thy wrong." They were all eager to know what the affair of the blanket was, and the landlord gave them a minute account of Sancho's flights, at which they laughed not a little, and at which Sancho would have been no less out of countenance had not his master once more assured him it was all enchantment. For all that his simplicity never reached so high a pitch that he could persuade himself it was not the plain and simple truth, without any deception whatever about it, that he had been blanketed by beings of flesh and blood, and not by visionary and imaginary phantoms, as his master believed and protested. The illustrious company had now been 2 days in the inn, and as it seemed to them time to depart, they devised a plan so that, without giving Dorotea and Don Fernando the trouble of going back with Don Quixote to his village under pretense of restoring Queen Micomicona, the curate and the barber might carry him away with them, as they proposed, and the curate be able to take his madness in hand at home. And in pursuance of their plan, they arranged with the owner of an ox cart, who happened to be passing that way, to carry him after this fashion. They constructed a kind of cage with wooden bars, large enough to hold Don Quixote comfortably. And then Don Fernando and his companions, the servants of Don Luis, and the officers of the Brotherhood, together with the landlord, by the directions and advice of the curate, covered their faces and disguised themselves, some in one way, some in another, so as to appear to Don Quixote quite different from the persons he had seen in the castle. This done, in profound silence, they entered the room where he was asleep, taking his rest after the past phrase, and, advancing to where he was sleeping tranquilly, not dreaming of anything of the kind happening, they seized him firmly and bound him fast, hand and foot, so that when he awoke startled, he was unable to move, and could only marvel and wonder at the strange figures he saw before him. Upon which he at once gave way to the idea which his crazed fancy invariably conjured up before him, and took it into his head that all these shapes were phantoms of the enchanted castle, and that he himself was unquestionably enchanted, as he could neither move nor help himself, precisely what the curate, the concoctor of the scheme, expected would happen. Of all that were there, Sancho was the only one who was at once in his senses, and in his own proper character, and he, though he was within very little of sharing his master's infirmity, did not fail to perceive who all these disguised figures were. But he did not dare open his lips until he saw what came of this assault and capture of his master, nor did the latter utter a word, waiting to the upshot of his mishap, which was that, bringing in the cage, they shut him up in it and nailed the bars so firmly that they could not be easily burst open. Then they took him on their shoulders, and as they passed out of the room, an awful voice, as much so as the barber, not he of the pack-saddle, but the other, was able to make it, was heard to say, "O knight of the rueful countenance, let not this captivity in which thou art placed afflict thee, for this must needs be, for the more speedy accomplishment of the adventure in which thy great heart has engaged thee, to which shall be accomplished when the raging Manchegan lion and the white Tobosan dove shall be linked together, for having first humbled their haughty necks to the gentle yoke of matrimony. And from this marvellous union shall come forth to the light of the world brave whelps that shall rival the ravening claws of their valiant father, and this shall come to pass ere the pursuer of the flying nymph shall, in his swift natural course, have twice visited the starry signs."
And thou, O most noble and obedient squire that ever bore sword at side, beard on face, or nose to smell with, be not dismayed or grieved to see the flower of knight-errantry carried away thus before thy very eyes. For soon, if it so please the framer of the universe, thou shalt see thyself exalted to such a height that thou shalt not know thyself, and the promises which thy good master has made thee shall not prove false, and I assure thee, on the authority of the sage Mentorodiana, that thy wages shall be paid thee, as thou shalt see in due season. Follow then the footsteps of the valiant enchanted knight, for it is expedient that thou shouldst go to the destination assigned to both of you. And, as it is not permitted to me to say more, God be with thee, for I return to that place I wot of.
The barber has been waiting for a chance to play a part. He's wanted this for so long. He was ready. So ready. And as he brought the prophecy to a close, he raised his voice to a high pitch, and then lowered it to such a soft tone that even those who knew it was all a joke were almost inclined to take what they heard seriously. Don Quixote was comforted by the prophecy he heard, for he at once comprehended its meaning perfectly, and perceived it was promised to him that he should see himself united in holy and lawful matrimony with his beloved Dulcinea del Toboso, from whose blessed womb should proceed the whelps, his sons, to the eternal glory of La Mancha. And being thoroughly and firmly persuaded of this, he lifted up his voice and with a deep sigh exclaimed, "Oh, thou, whoever thou art!" Damn. A little too much with a few of these voices tonight.
O thou, whoever thou art, who hast foretold me so much good, I implore thee that on my part thou entreat that sage enchanter who takes charge of my interests, that he leave me not to perish in this captivity in which they are now carrying me away, ere I see my fulfilled promises so joyful and incomparable as those which have been now made me. For, let this but come to pass, and I shall glory in the pains of my prison, find comfort in these chains wherewith they bind me, and regard this bed whereon they stretch me, not as a hard battlefield, but as a soft and happy nuptial couch. And touching the consolation of Sancho Panza, my squire, I rely upon his goodness and rectitude, that he will not desert me in good or evil fortune. For if, by his ill luck or mine, it may not happen to be in my power to give him the island I have promised, or any equivalent for it, at least his wages shall not be lost. For in my will, which is already made, I have declared the sum that shall be paid to him, measured not by his many faithful services, but by the means at my disposal.
Sancho bowed his head very respectfully, and kissed both his hands, for, being tied together, he could not kiss one. And then the apparitions lifted the cage upon their shoulders, and fixed it upon the ox cart. And that brings us to the end of chapter 46. And that is not how I expected the adventure of the inn to come to a conclusion. To be kidnapped by his friends and convinced through a prophecy given by the barber of all people, who was ready. He had that speech locked in. Had a prophecy delivered that it wasn't Don Quixote who was to slay the giant and restore Princess Micomicona. No. It was his scions. So they played him good. in classic fantasy fashion. Like, whew. That's like trade paperback fantasy bread and butter right there. Not even chivalric tales, not even the old Arthurian style. No. This is, you picked it up at a grocery store, fantasy fiction prophecy going on right there. And Don Quixote is all for it. He was ready. He was ready to believe. It works. It works. And that rant that Don Quixote had when Sancho was bringing to light that he saw Dorothea necking a little with her husband. Ooh, that had some spice to it. There was a little bit of heat in that. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, guys. Let's go ahead and take a short break. I need to freshen up with a little bit more to drink here, because there was a little bit, that was a bit of a strain in a few of those sections on there, but man, was it fun to deliver. I enjoyed that a lot. So let's take a few minutes, top up our drinks, stretch our legs, and we'll be right back. Thanks, guys. All right. Oh my goodness, hello. Hey, it's Ultra Blue. Welcome, guys. Thank you for stopping in. It's nice to be on the receiving end of a raid for once. We are reading Don Quixote tonight. What were you guys up to?
Oh, Sims 4. That is fun. Now, let me see if I can figure this out. Oh, okay. Are you, did you didn't finish, with, Dorian Gray, did you? Ah, perfect. Well, we've got about an hour left in our time slot, and if you're still going when we finish, I'll probably send your way. So, thank you for swinging by. If I can figure out how this Twitch thing works, what's the how do you shout out? I'm rather fresh around these parts. Here we go. See if that... Hey, there we go. Got it in one. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and we're going to go ahead and get back into our reading, and we'll see how far along we get tonight. We're nearing the end of part 1 of Don Quixote, and we are considering, likely, going to be taking a break at the end of part 1 to try something new. If you may have noticed from the stream title, we've been at this for some time. 12 parts is rather a lot for one book. So, for now, let's see what further misadventures our protagonist can get up to tonight. So, let's continue with chapter 47 of The Strange Manner in which Don Quixote of La Mancha was carried away enchanted, together with other remarkable incidents. Hey, yeah, no, thanks for hanging around. I have it on good authority that I make decent background music, or background noise, while you're cooking in the kitchen. Akamos will attest. All right. So, continuing on. When Don Quixote saw himself caged and hoisted on the cart in this way, he said, "Many grave histories of knights-errant have I read, but never yet have I read, seen, or heard of their carrying off enchanted knights-errant in this fashion, or at the slow pace that these lazy, sluggish animals promise. For they always take them away through the air, with marvellous swiftness, enveloped in a dark, thick cloud, or on a chariot of fire, or it may be on some hippogriff or other beast of the kind. But to carry me off like this on an ox cart, by God, it puzzles me. But perhaps the chivalry and enchantments of our day take a different course from that of those in days gone by. And it may be, too, that, as I am a new knight in the world, and the first to revive the already forgotten calling of knight adventurers, they may have newly invented other kinds of enchantments and other modes of carrying off the enchanted. What thinkest thou of the matter, Sancho, my son?"
"I don't know what to think," answered Sancho, "not being as well read as your worship in errant writings. But for all that I venture to say and swear that these apparitions that are about us are not quite Catholic."
"Catholic?" said Don Quixote. "Father of me, how can they be Catholic, when they are all devils that have taken fantastic shapes to come and do this, and bring me to this condition? And if thou wouldst prove it, touch them, and feel them, and thou wilt find they have only bodies of air, and no consistency, except in appearance."
"By God, master," returned Sancho, "I have touched them already, and that devil that goes there so busily has firm flesh." And another property very different from what I have heard say devils have, for by all accounts, they all smell of brimstone and other bad smells, but this one smells of amber half a league off.
Sancho was here speaking of Don Fernando, who, like a gentleman of his rank, was very likely perfumed, as Sancho said.
Marvel not at that, Sancho, my friend, said Don Quixote, for let me tell thee, devils are crafty, and even if they do carry odors about with them, they themselves have no smell, because they are spirits, or if they have any smell, they cannot smell of anything sweet, but of something foul and fetid. And the reason is that they, as they carry hell with them wherever they go, and can get no ease whatever from their torments, and as a sweet smell is a thing that gives pleasure and enjoyment, it is impossible that they can smell sweet. If then this devil thou speakest of seems to thee to smell of amber, either thou art deceiving thyself, or he wants to deceive thee by making thee fancy he is not a devil.
Such was the conversation that passed between master and man, and Don Fernando and Cardenio, apprehensive of Sancho's making a complete discovery of their scheme, towards which he had already gone some way, resolved to hasten their departure, and calling the landlord aside, they directed him to saddle Rocinante and put the pack saddle on Sancho's ass, which he did with great alacrity. In the meantime, the curate had made an arrangement with the officers that they should bear them company as far as his village. He was paying them so much a day. Cardenio hung the buckler on one side of Rocinante's saddle, and the basin on the other, and by signs commanded Sancho to mount his ass and take Rocinante's bridle. And at each side of the cart he placed 2 officers with their muskets. But before the cart was put in motion, out came the landlady and her daughter, and Maritornes, to bid Don Quixote farewell, pretending to weep with grief at his misfortune. And to them Don Quixote said, "Weep not, good ladies, for all these mishaps are the lot of those who follow the profession I profess. And if these reverses did not befall me, I should not esteem myself a famous knight-errant. For such things never happen to knights of little renown and fame, because nobody in the world thinks about them. To valiant knights they do, for these are envied for their virtue and valor by many princes and other knights who compass the destruction of the worthy by base means. Nevertheless, virtue is of herself so mighty that in spite of all the magic that Zoroaster, its first inventor, knew, she will come victorious out of every trial and shed her light upon the earth, as the sun does upon the heavens. Forgive me, fair ladies, if, through inadvertence, I have in aught offended you, for intentionally and wittingly I have never done so to any, and pray to God that he deliver me from this captivity to which some malevolent enchanter has consigned me. And should I find myself released therefrom, the favours that ye have bestowed upon me in this castle shall be held in memory by me, that I may acknowledge, recognize, and requite them as they deserve." While this was passing between the ladies of the castle and Don Quixote, the curate and the barber bade farewell to Don Fernando and his companions. The captain, his brother, and the ladies, now all made happy, and in particular to Dorothea and Lucinda. They all embraced one another, and promised to let each other know how things went with them, and Don Fernando directed the curate where to write him, to tell him what became of Don Quixote, assuring him that there was nothing that could give him more pleasure than to hear of it, and that he too, on his part, would send him word of everything he thought he would like to know about his marriage, Zoraida's baptism, Don Luis's affair, and Lucinda's return to her home. The curate promised to comply with his request carefully. They embraced once more and renewed their promises.
Despite all this, I still cannot bring myself to like Don Fernando. He was just such a classic, like, Snively Whiplash tier villain that there can be no forgiveness. It just doesn't work. The landlord approached the curate and handed him some papers, saying he had discovered them in the lining of the valise in which the novel of The Ill-Advised Curiosity had been found, and that he might take them all away with him as their owner had not since returned, for, as he could not read, he did not want them himself. The curate thanked him, and opening them, he saw at the beginning of the manuscript the words, "Novel of Rinconet and Cortadillo," by which he perceived that it was a novel, and as that of The Ill-Advised Curiosity had been good, he concluded that this would be so too, as they were both probably by the same author. So he kept it, intending to read it when he had an opportunity. He then mounted, and his friend the barber did the same, both masked so as not to be recognized by Don Quixote, and set out following in the rear of the cart. The order of march was this. First went the cart, with the owner leading it. At each side of it marched the officers of the Brotherhood, as has been said, with their muskets. Then followed Sancho Panza, on his ass. Leading Rocinante by the bridle, and behind all came the curate and the barber on their mighty mules, their faces covered, as aforesaid, and a grave and serious air, measuring their pace to suit the slow steps of the oxen. Don Quixote was seated in the cage, with his hands tied and his feet stretched out, leaning against the bars as silent and as patient, as if he were a stone statue and not a man of flesh. Thus, slowly and silently they made, it might be, 2 leagues, until they reached a valley, which the carter thought a convenient place for resting and feeding his oxen, and he said so to the curate. But the barber was of the opinion that they ought to push on a little farther, as at the other side of a hill, which appeared close by, he knew there was a valley that had more grass, and was much better than the one where they proposed to halt. And his advice was taken, and they continued their journey. Just at that moment, the curate, looking back, saw, coming on behind them, 6 or 7 mounted men, well found and equipped, who soon overtook them, for they were traveling not at the sluggish, deliberate pace of oxen, but like men who rode cannon's mules, and in haste to take their noontide rest as soon as possible at the inn, which was in sight not a league off. The quick travelers came up with the slow and courteous salutations were exchanged. And one of the newcomers, who was in fact a canon of Toledo and master of the others who accompanied him, observing the regular order of the procession, the cart, the officers, Sancho, Rocinante, the curate, and the barber, and above all, Don Quixote, caged and confined, could not help but asking what was the meaning of carrying the man in that fashion, though, from the badges of the officers, he already concluded that he must be some desperate highwayman or other malefactor, whose punishment fell within the jurisdiction of the Holy Brotherhood. One of the officers, to whom he had put the question, replied, "Let the gentleman himself tell you the meaning of his going this way, signor, for we do not know." Don Quixote overheard the conversation and said, "Haply, gentlemen, you are versed and learned in matters of errant chivalry, because if you are, I will tell you my misfortunes. If not, there is no good in my giving myself the trouble of relating them." But here the curate and the barber, seeing that the travelers were engaged in conversation with Don Quixote, came forward, in order to answer in such a way as to save their stratagem from being discovered.
The canon, replying to Don Quixote, said, "In truth, brother, I know more about books of chivalry than I do about Villalpando's elements of logic. So, if that be all, you may safely tell me what you please." "In God's name, then, Signor," replied Don Quixote, "if that be so, I would have you know that I am held enchanted in this cage by the envy and fraud of wicked enchanters. For virtue is more persecuted by the wicked than loved by the good. I am a knight-errant, and not one of those whose names fame has never thought of immortalizing in her record, but of those who, in defiance, and in spite of envy itself, and all the magicians at Persia, or Brahmins at India, or gymnophobists that Ethiopia ever produced, will place their names in the temple of immortality, to serve as examples and patterns for ages to come, whereby knights-errant may see the footsteps in which they must tread if they would attain the summit and crowning point of honor in arms."
"What Signor Don Quixote of La Mancha says," observed the curate, "is the truth, for he goes enchanted in this cart, not from any fault of sins of his, but because of the malevolence of those to whom virtue is odious and valor hateful. This, Signor, is the Knight of the Rueful Countenance, if you have ever heard him named, whose valiant achievements and mighty deeds shall be written on lasting brass and imperishable marble, notwithstanding all the efforts of envy to obscure them and malice to hide them."
When the canon heard both the prisoner and the man who was at liberty talk in such a strain, he was ready to cross himself in his astonishment, and could not make out what had befallen him, and all his attendants were in the same state of amazement. At this point, Sancho Panza, who had drawn near to hear the conversation, said, in order to make everything plain,
"Well, sirs, you may like or dislike what I am going to say, but the fact of the matter is, my master Don Quixote is just as much enchanted as my mother. He is in his full senses. He eats and he drinks, and he has his calls like other men, and as he had yesterday before they caged him. And if that's the case, what do they mean by wanting me to believe that he's enchanted? For I have heard many one say that enchanted people neither eat, nor sleep, nor talk, and my master, if you don't stop him, will talk more than 30 lawyers."
Then, turning to the curate, he exclaimed,
"Oh, Signor Curate, do you think I don't know you? Do you think I don't guess and see the drift of these new enchantments? Well then, I can tell you I know you, for all your face is covered. And I can tell you, I am up to you, however you may hide your tricks. After all, where envy reigns, virtue cannot live, and where there is niggardliness, there can be no liberality. Ill betide the devil. If it had not been for your worship, my master would be married to the Princess Micomicona this minute, and I should be a count at least. For no less was to be expected, as well from the goodness of my master, him of the rueful countenance, as from the greatness of my services. But I see now how true it is what they say in these parts, that the wheel of fortune turns faster than a mill wheel, and that those who were up yesterday are down today. I am sorry for my wife and children, for when they might fairly and reasonably expect to see their father return to them a governor or viceroy of some island or kingdom, they will see him come back a horseboy. I have said all this, Signor Curate, only to urge your paternity, to lay to your consciousness your ill treatment of my master, and have a care that God does not call you to account in another life for making a prisoner of him in this way, and charge against you all the succours and good deeds that my lord Don Quixote leaves undone, while he is shut up."
"Trim those lamps there!" exclaimed the barber at this. "So you are of the same fraternity as your master too, Sancho? By God, I begin to see that you will have to keep him company in the cage, and be enchanted like him for having caught some of his humor and chivalry. It was an evil hour when you let yourself be got with child by his promises, and that island you longed so much for found its way into your head."
"I am not with child by anyone," returned Sancho, "nor am I a man to let myself be got with child. If it was by the king himself. Though I am poor, I am an old Christian, and I owe nothing to nobody. And if I long for an island, other people long for worse. Each of us is the son of his own works, and being a man, I may come to be pope, not to say governor of an island, especially as my master may win so many that he will not know whom to give them to. Mind how you talk, Master Barber, for shaving is not everything, and there is some difference between Peter and Peter. I say this because we all know one another, and it will not do to throw false dice with me. And as to the enchantment of my master, God knows the truth. Leave it as it is. It only makes it worse to stir it."
The barber did not care to answer Sancho, lest by his plain speaking he should disclose what the curate and he himself were trying so hard to conceal. And out of the same apprehension, the curate had asked the canon to ride on a little in advance, so that he might tell him the mystery of this man in the cage, and other things that would amuse him. The canon agreed, and going on ahead with his servants, listened with attention to the account of the character, life, madness, and ways of Don Quixote, given him by the curate, who described to him briefly the beginning and origin of his craze, and told him the whole story of his adventures, up to his being confined in the cage, together with the plan they had of taking him home to try if, by any means, they could discover a cure for his madness. The canon and his servants were surprised anew when they heard Don Quixote's strange story, and when it was finished he said, "To tell the truth, Señor Curate, I, for my part, consider what they call books of chivalry to be mischievous to the state, and though led by idle and false taste, I have read the beginnings of almost all that have been printed. I never could imagine to read any one of them from beginning to end, for it seems to me they are all more or less the same thing, and one has nothing more in it than another. This is no more than that, and in my opinion, this sort of writing and composition is of the same species as the fables they call the Milesian, nonsensical tales that aim solely at giving amusement and not instruction. Exactly the opposite of the apologue fables, which amuse and instruct at the same time. And though it may be the chief object of such books to amuse, I do not know how they can succeed. They're so full of such monstrous nonsense. For the enjoyment the mind feels must come from the beauty and harmony which it perceives or contemplates in the things that the eye or the imagination brings before it, and nothing that has any ugliness or disproportion about it can give any pleasure. What beauty, then, or what proportion of the parts to the whole, or of the whole to the parts, can there be in a book of fable where a lad of 16 cuts down a giant as tall as a tower, and makes two halves of him as if it was an almond cake? And they want to give us a picture of a battle after having told us that there were 1,000,000 of combatants on the side of the enemy. Let the hero of the book be opposed to them, and we have perforce to believe, whether we like it or not, that the said knight wins the victory by the single might of his strong arm. And then, what shall we say of the facility with which a born queen or empress will give herself over into the arms of some unknown wandering knight? What mind that is not wholly barbarous and uncultured can find pleasure in reading of how a great tower full of knights sails away across the sea like a ship with a fair wind, and will be tonight in Lombardy, and tomorrow morning in the land of Prester John of the Indies, or some other that Ptolemy never described nor Marco Polo saw? And if, in answer to this, I am told that the authors of books of the kind write them as fiction, and therefore are not bound to regard niceties of truth, I would reply that fiction is all the better the more it looks like truth, and gives the more pleasure the more probability and possibility there is about it. Plots in fiction should be wedded to the understanding of the reader, and be constructed in such a way that reconciling impossibilities, smoothing over difficulties, keeping the mind on the alert, they may surprise, interest, divert, and entertain, so that wonder and delight joined may keep peace one with the other, all which he will fail to effect who shuns verisimilitude and truth to nature, wherein lies the perfection of writing. I have never yet seen any book of chivalry that puts together a connected plot complete in all its numbers, so that the middle agrees with the beginning, and the end with the beginning and middle. On the contrary, they construct them with such a multitude of members that it seems as though they meant to produce a chimera or monster rather than a well-proportioned figure. And besides all this, they are harsh in their style, incredible in their achievements, licentious in their amours, uncouth in their courtly speeches, prolix in their battles, silly in their arguments, absurd in their travels, and, in short, wanting in everything like intelligent art, for which reason they deserve to be banished from the Christian commonwealth as a worthless breed. This guy has far too much detail and available nitpicks to have just read the beginning of a few of them. No. He's probably got a more robust library than Don Quixote himself, and is just making a bit of a face to save his own face in front of the curate, and to convince himself that he's not nearly as bad as Don Quixote and isn't about to go off the deep end just like him. No. That'd just be silly. No. All of this must be hogwash. The curate listened to him attentively, and felt that he was a man of sound understanding, and that there was a good reason in what he said, so he told him that, being of the same opinion himself, and bearing a grudge to books of chivalry, he had burned all Don Quixote's, which were many, and gave him an account of the scrutiny he had made of them, and of those he had condemned to the flames, and those he had spared, with which the canon was not a little amused. Adding that, though he had said so much in condemnation of the books, still he found one good thing in them, and that was the opportunity they afforded to a gifted intellect for displaying itself, for they presented a wide and spacious field over which the pen might range freely, describing shipwrecks, tempests, combats, battles, portraying a valiant captain with all the qualifications requisite to make one, showing him sagacious and in foreseeing the wiles of the enemy, eloquent in speech to encourage or restrain his soldiers, ripe in counsel, rapid in resolve, as bold in biding his time as in pressing the attack. Now, picturing some sad, tragic incident, now some joyful and unexpected event. Here a beauteous lady, virtuous, wise, and modest. There a Christian knight, brave and gentle. Here a lawless, barbarous braggart. There a courteous prince, gallant and gracious, setting forth the devotion and loyalty of vassals, the greatness and generosity of nobles. Or again, said he, the author may show himself to be an astronomer, or a skilled cosmographer, or musician, or one versed in affairs of state, and sometimes he will have a chance of coming forward as a magician if he likes. He can set forth the craftiness of Ulysses, the piety of Aeneas, the valor of Achilles, the misfortunes of Hector, the treachery of Sinon, the friendship of Euryalus, the generosity of Alexander, the boldness of Caesar, the clemency and truth of Trajan, the fidelity of Zopyrus, the wisdom of Cato, and, in short, all the faculties that serve to make an illustrious man perfect.
Now, uniting them in one individual. Again, distributing them among many. And if this be done with charm of style and ingenious invention, aiming at the truth as much as possible, he will assuredly weave a web of bright and varied threads that, when finished, will display such perfection and beauty that it will attain the worthiest object any writing can seek, which, as I said before, is to give instruction and pleasure combined. For the unrestricted range of these books enables the author to show his powers, epic, lyric, tragic, or comic, and all the moods, the sweet and winning arts of poesy and oratory are capable of. For the epic may be written in prose just as well as in verse.
All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 47. We are kind of getting a little twisty here because we've been on the road for a while. They've been at the inn for a very long while. But now that we're on the road, they've gone all of 2 leagues. Barely anywhere at all. They can still see the inn on the horizon. And we have newcomers that are, of course, stopping things as we go. And Sancho sees through all of the ruse. As much of a simple man as he is, he's not quite as taken or as touched as his sworn knight is. So, we've got a fair bit of time yet. We've got about another half hour or so. So, let's try to get at least one more chapter in. We're nearing the end of part 1. I believe the last chapter of part 1 is chapter 52. Yeah, he usually sees through things and is shamed for it. So this is all in character for Sancho and Don Quixote both. It is just... It's disappointing that Sancho is so consistently shot down and convinces himself that in being shamed for it, he must have been wrong. He just accepts it, rather than just being like, oh, yep, that's fine, yeah, no. Alright, let's try and get through one more chapter tonight, and then we'll see where we are at the end of this one, as far as how much time we have left, and how many chapters we have remaining. As I said, chapter 51 is the last chapter in in part 1, so we can probably get to the end of that next time. So if we take a bit of an early day on Tuesday, I bet we could probably wrap things up neatly and start a new project for the weekend. So, let's see. We now have chapter 58, in which the canon pursues the subject of the books of chivalry, with other matters worthy of his wit. Yeah, the canon who is just flexing his wit for the sake of it. We've all met those like him.
It is, as you say, Signor Canon,
said the curate.
And for that reason, those who have hitherto written books of the sort deserve all the more censure for writing without paying any attention to good taste or the rules of art, by which they might guide themselves and become as famous in prose as the 2 princes of Greek and Latin poetry are in verse.
I myself, at any rate, said the canon, was once tempted to write a book of chivalry in which all the points I have mentioned were to be observed. And if I must own the truth, I have more than 100 sheets written, and to try if it came up to my own opinion of it, I showed them to persons who were fond of this kind of writing, to learned and intelligent men, as well as to ignorant people who cared for nothing but the pleasure of listening to nonsense. And from all, I obtained flattering approval.
How long was the Mysterious Island? Because that was our longest. But I don't for the life of me remember where it laid off. Was it... Oh, okay. So what was our longest? Is it... Oh, that's right. Three Musketeers was really long. Which makes sense. Dumas never shows up. Where were we?
And from all I obtained flattering approval. Nevertheless, I proceeded no farther with it, as well because it seemed to me an occupation inconsistent with my profession, as because I perceived that the fools are more numerous than the wise, and though it is better to be praised by the wise few than applauded by the foolish many, I have no mind to submit myself to the stupid judgment of the silly public, to whom the reading of such books falls for the most part.
Yeah, so in addition to 13 being the minimum on this, according to my reader, we're only at 44% of the way through this book. Let that sink in for a minute. So, I'm very, very much convincing myself that part 1 is a great stopping point for this. Because as much as I enjoy reading Don Quixote, I don't want to just be a Don Quixote channel.
But what most of all made me hold my hand and even abandon all idea of finishing it was an argument I put to myself, taken from the plays that are acted nowadays, which was in this wise. If those that are now in vogue, as well those that are pure invention, as those founded on history, are, all or most of them, downright nonsense, and things that have neither head nor tail, and yet the public listens to them with delight, and regards and cries them up as perfection, when they are so far from it. And if the authors who write them, and the players who act them, say that this is what they must be, for the public wants this and will have nothing else, and that those that go by rule and work out a plot according to the laws of art will only find some half-dozen intelligent people to understand them, while all the rest remain blind to the merit of their composition, and that for themselves it is better to get bread from the many than praise from the few, then my book will fare the same way, after I have burnt off my eyebrows in trying to observe the principles I have spoken of, and I shall be the tailor of the corner. And though I have sometimes endeavored to convince actors that they are mistaken in this notion they have adopted, and that they would attract more people and get more credit by producing plays in accordance with the rules of art than by absurd ones, they are so thoroughly wedded to their own opinion that no argument or evidence can wean them from it. I remember saying one day to one of these obstinate fellows, "Tell me, do you not recollect a few years ago there were 3 tragedies acted in Spain, written by a famous poet of these kingdoms, which were such that they filled all who heard them with admiration, delight, and interest, the ignorant as well as the wise, the masses as well as the higher orders, and brought in more money to the performers, these 3 alone, than 30 of the best that have been since produced?" "No doubt," replied the actor in question. "You mean the Isabella, the Phyllis, and the Alexandra?" "Those are the ones I mean," said I, "and see if they did not observe the principles of art, and if by observing them they failed to show their superiority and please all the world, so that the fault does not lie with the public that insists upon nonsense, but with those who don't know how to produce something else. The ingratitude revenged was not nonsense, nor was there any in the Numantia, nor any to be found in the merchant lover, nor yet in the friendly fair foe, nor in some others that have been written by certain gifted poets, to their own fame and renown, and to the profit of those that brought them out." Some further remarks I added to these, with which I think I left him rather dumbfounded, but not so satisfied or convinced that I could disabuse him of the error. You have touched upon a subject, Signor Canon, observed the curate here, that has awakened an old enmity I have against the plays in vogue at the present day, quite as strong as that which I bear to the books of chivalry. For while the drama, according to Tully, should be the mirror of human life, the model of manners, and the image of the truth, those which are presented nowadays are mirrors of nonsense, models of folly, and images of lewdness. But for what greater nonsense can there be in connection with what we are now discussing than for an infant to appear in swaddling clothes in the first scene of the first act, and in the second a grown-up bearded man? Or what greater absurdity can there be than putting before us an old man as a swashbuckler, a young man as a poltroon, a lackey using fine language, a page giving sage advice, a king plying as a porter, a princess who is a kitchen maid? And then, what shall I say of their attention to the time in which the action they represent may or can take place, save that I have seen a play where the first act began in Europe, the second in Asia, the third finished in Africa, and, no doubt, had it been in 4 acts, the fourth would have ended in America. And so, it would have been laid in all 4 quarters of the globe. And if truth to life is the main thing the drama should keep in view, how is it possible for any average understanding to be satisfied when the action is supposed to pass in the time of King Pepin or Charlemagne, and the principal personage in it they represent to be the Emperor Heraclius, who entered Jerusalem with the cross and won the Holy Sepulchre, like Godfrey of Bouillon, there being years innumerable between the one and the other? Or, if the play is based on fiction, and historical facts are introduced, or bits of what occurred to different people and at different times mixed up with it, all not only without semblance of probability, but with obvious errors that from every point of view are inexcusable. And the worst of it is, there are ignorant people who say that this is perfection, and that anything beyond this is affected refinement. And then, if we turn to sacred dramas, what miracles they invent in them! What apocryphal, ill-devised incidents attributing to one saint the miracles of another! And even in secular plays, they venture to introduce miracles without any reason or object except that they think some such miracle or transformation, as they call it, will come in well to astonish stupid people and draw them to the play. All this tends to the prejudice of the truth and the corruption of history, nay, more, to the reproach of the wits of Spain. For foreigners who scrupulously observe the laws of the drama look upon us as barbarous and ignorant when they see the absurdity and nonsense of the plays we produce. Nor will it be a sufficient excuse to say that the chief object well-ordered governments have in view when they permit plays to be performed in public is to entertain the people with some harmless amusement occasionally, and keep it from those evil humors which idleness is apt to engender. And that, as this may be attained by any sort of play, good or bad, there is no need to lay down laws, or bind those who write or act them to make them as they ought to be made, since, as I say, the object sought for may be secured by any sort. To this, I would reply that the same end would be, beyond all comparison, better attained by means of good plays, than by those that are not so. For after listening to an artistic and properly constructed play, the hearer will come away enlivened by the jests, instructed by the serious parts,
full of admiration at the incidents, his wits sharpened by the arguments, warned by the tricks, all the wiser for the examples, inflamed against vice and in love with virtue, for in all these ways a good play will stimulate the mind of the hearer, be he ever so boorish or dull, and of all impossibilities the greatest is that a play endowed with all these qualities will not entertain, satisfy, and please much more than one wanting in them, like the greater number of those which are commonly acted nowadays. Nor are the poets who write them to be blamed for this, nor for some there are among them who are perfectly well aware of their faults, and know what they ought to do. But as plays have become a saleable commodity, they say, and with truth, that the actors will not buy them unless they are after this fashion, and so the poet tries to adapt himself to the requirements of the actor, who is to pay him for his work. And that this is the truth may be seen by the countless plays that a most fertile wit of these kingdoms has written, with so much brilliancy, so much grace and gaiety, such polished versification, such choice language, such profound reflections, and, in a word, so rich in eloquence and elevation of style, that he has filled the world with his fame, and yet, in consequence of his desire to suit the taste of the actors, they have not all, as some of them have, come as near perfection as they ought. Others write plays with such heedlessness that after they have been acted, the actors have to fly and abscond, afraid of being punished, as they often have been, for having acted something offensive to some king or other, or insulting to some noble family. All which evils, and many more that I say nothing of, would be removed, if there were some intelligent and sensible person at the capital to examine all plays before they were acted. Not only those produced in the capital itself, but all that were intended to be acted in Spain, without whose approval, seal, and signature no local magistracy should allow any play to be acted. In that case, actors would take care to send their plays to the capital, and could act them in safety, and those who write them would be more careful, and take more pains with their works, standing in awe of having to submit it to the strict examination of one who understood the matter, and so good plays would be produced, and the objects they aim at happily attained, as well the amusement of the people as the credit of the wits of Spain, the interest and safety of the actors, and the saving of trouble in inflicting punishment on them. And if the same or some other person were authorized to examine the newly written books of chivalry, no doubt some would appear with all the perfections you have described, enriching our language with the gracious and precious treasure of eloquence, and driving the old books into obscurity before the light of the new ones that would come out for the harmless entertainment, not merely of the idle, but of the very busiest, for the bow cannot always be bent, nor can the weak human nature exist without some lawful amusement.
Curate, calm the hell down. That was a lot, brother. And we don't need a censorship bureau for plays and fiction in Spain. No, thank you very much. It wasn't a good idea then, it's not a good idea now. The canon and the curate had proceeded thus far with their conversation, when the barber, coming forward, joined them, and said to the curate, This is the spot, Signor License it, that I said was a good one for fresh and plentiful pasture for the oxen, while we take our noontide rest. Yeah, there's been experiments with the sort all through history, and never really done terribly well. There's usually some sort of rubber banding effect. Whether rubber bands have been invented yet or not is irrelevant to the case.
And so it seems, returned the curate, and he told the canon what he proposed to do, on which he too made up his mind to halt with them. Of course, he doesn't want to carry on. We're going to be cursed with this, more of this pseudo-intellectualism, I'm sure. Attracted by the aspect of the fair valley that lay before their eyes, and to enjoy it as well as the conversation of the curate, to whom he had begun to take a fancy, and also to learn more particulars about the doings of Don Quixote, he desired some of his servants to go on to the inn, which was not far distant, and fetch from it what eatables there might be for the whole party, as he meant to rest for the afternoon where he was. To which one of his servants replied that the sumpter mule, which by this time ought to have reached the inn, carried provisions enough to make it unnecessary to get anything from the inn except barley.
In that case,
said the canon,
take all the beasts there and bring the sumpter mule back.
While this was going on, Sancho, perceiving that he could speak to his master without having the curate and the barber, of whom he had his suspicions, present all the time, approached the cage in which Don Quixote was placed, and said,
Signor, to ease my conscience, I want to tell you the state of the case as to your enchantment, and that is, that these two here, with their faces covered, are the curate of our village and the barber, and I suspect they have hit upon this plan of carrying you off in this fashion, out of pure envy, because your worship surpasses them in doing famous deeds. And if this be the truth, it follows that you are not enchanted, but hoodwinked, and made a fool of. And to prove this, I want to ask you one thing, and if you answer me as I believe you will answer, you will be able to lay your finger on the trick, and you will see that you are not enchanted, but gone wrong in your wits.
That's what thou wilt, Sancho, my son, returned Don Quixote, for I will satisfy thee, and answer all thou requirest. As to what thou sayest, that these who accompany us yonder are the curate and the barber, our neighbours and acquaintances, it is very possible that they may seem to be those same persons, but that they are so in reality, and in fact believe it not on any account. What thou art to believe and think is that, if they look like them, as thou sayest, it must be that those who have enchanted me have taken this shape and likeness, for it is easy for enchanters to take any form they please, and they may have been taken those of our friends, in order to make thee think as thou dost, and lead thee into a labyrinth of fancies from which thou wilt find no escape, though thou hadst the core of Theseus. And they may also have done it to make me uncertain in my mind, and unable to conjecture whence this evil comes to me. For, if on the one hand thou dost tell me that the barber and the curate of our village are here in company with us, and on the other I find myself shut up in a cage, and know in my heart that no power on earth that was not supernatural would have been able to shut me in, what wouldst thou have me say or think, but that my enchantment is of a sort that transcends all I have ever read of in all the histories that deal with knights-errant that have been enchanted? So thou mayest set thy mind at rest as to the idea that they are what thou sayest, for they are, as much as I am a Turk. By touching thy desire to ask me something, say on, and I will answer thee, though thou shouldst ask questions from this till tomorrow morning.
May our lady be good to me,
said Sancho, lifting up his voice.
And is it possible that your worship is so thick of skull and so short of brains that you cannot see that what I say is the simple truth, and that the malice has more to do with your imprisonment and misfortune than enchantment. But as it is so, I will prove plainly to you that you are not enchanted. Now tell me, so may God deliver you from this affliction, and so you may find yourself, when you least expect it, in the arms of my lady Dulcinea."
"Leave off conjuring me," said Don Quixote, "and ask what thou wouldst know. I have already told thee I will answer with all possible precision."
"That is what I want," said Sancho, "and what I would know, and have you tell me, without adding or leaving out anything, but telling the whole truth as one expects it to be told, and as it is told, by all who profess arms, as your worship professes them, under the title of knights errant."
"I tell thee I will not lie in any particular," said Don Quixote. "Finish thy question, for in truth thou weariest me with all these asseverations, requirements, and precautions, Sancho."
"Well, I rely on the goodness and truth of my master," said Sancho, "and so, because it bears upon what we are talking about, I would ask, speaking with all reverence, whether, since your worship has been shut up and, as you think, enchanted in this cage, you have felt any desire or an inclination to go anywhere, as the saying is."
"I do not understand going anywhere," said Don Quixote. "Explain thyself more clearly, Sancho, if thou wouldst have me give an answer to the point."
"Is it possible," said Sancho, "that your worship does not understand going anywhere? Why, the schoolboys know that from time to time they were babes. Well then, you must know. I mean, have you had any desire to do what cannot be avoided?"
"Ah, now I understand thee, Sancho," said Don Quixote. "Yes, often, and even this minute. Get me out of this strait, or all will not go right."
And once more, we loop back to Don Quixote and Sancho having bathroom humor. It is good to know that some things are, in fact, timeless. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 48. And that'll be where we wrap up for tonight. We should have about 3 chapters remaining, I believe. 4, or let's see, 3. 4 chapters remaining in part 1 that we should be able to finish handily on Tuesday. So I think that'll be where we wrap up Don Quixote for the time being, given that part 1 will have been 13 sessions long. I won't feel remiss about that. Yeah, it has had some very good ones, and some that were far closer to being just straight up raunchy and dirty jokes than I would have expected. Like, that point where Sancho was just holding on to Don Quixote's leg, trying to keep him from running off to the fulling mills, and he just pinched off a log right there. Yeah, we remember that one. Woo! Oh. All right, guys, this will be where we wrap up for tonight. Let me set a bookmark here. And let's get back to our out of the reading nook and into just a little bit of comfort here. So, the game plan now. On Tuesday, our next normally scheduled reading, we'll be finishing the last few chapters of part 1 of Don Quixote. I don't know what we'll read next, but I'll have a few days to figure that out. Our next reading after that, so we're back to our usual schedule at this point. So we'll have Tuesday Don Quixote, Friday and Sunday the next classic that we'll be picking up, and then we'll be having our Saturday reading of the unarchived series that we've started a couple weeks ago, The Fellowship of the Ring. So, we've got a lot to look forward to. Things are moving and a-grooving around here. And we're doing pretty alright. Doing alright. I will note, it was, I do believe, just a couple days ago, I want to say Friday maybe, we hit over 50 subscribers over on YouTube. So, it's taken us a year, but you know what? We're rather niche. So, as always, I said, I'm in it for the love of the game. And we're seeing some results. Very happy with that turnaround. So, yeah, not bad at all. Not bad at all. Especially considering about the only growth we have is word of mouth and algorithmic assistance. So, I'm happy with this. And we'll continue to just keep on chugging along. All right, those of you on YouTube, in the pursuit of said expansion, the algorithmic assistance, a like and a subscription to the channel would not be remiss. For those of you on Twitch, we're growing rapidly. We're up to about 14 followers now, after just under a month, actually. No, it's been what? It's only been a few weeks, hasn't it? Wow. We're doing good. Twitch is going a little bit faster. We may have imported a little bit of the audience. I'm not one to quibble. But with all that said, we're making new friends around here, and new friends are always welcome. On that topic, let's go ahead and see if Ultra Blue is reading again tonight, because she was kind enough to raid into us. Our very first raid, mind you. So, let's see if we can return the favor tonight. We'll do a little bit of a round robin and see if we can join in as she is finishing The Portrait of Dorian Gray, which we enjoyed so much when we read it several months ago. And yes, she is. She just started about half an hour ago. So, let's go ahead and prepare for a raid, and we will give her our best. As for us here, thank you very much for joining us. And until next time, on Tuesday, good night.